Hello, family members. Hope you're having a nice day today. I want to talk to you today about a topic that has been on my mind for a little bit. So let's start out with a story. In the early 1910s, 1912, I believe, is the official start of it. Something called the West Virginia Coal Wars started. And it was essentially a drive to unionize the West Virginia coal workers so that, they could have a little bit better conditions. I mean, it was abysmal, the way that the coal companies were exploiting those workers, and so they decided to form a union and fight back. And through a series of escalating conflicts, in 1921, 10,000 miners were bombed and attacked and engaged in a full-scale battle with the U.S. Army, who was working on the side of the mine owners to break the strike. A little bit annoying. They were outnumbered 3-1, but the loss was horrific for the state of West Virginia. It was the beginning of the end of that state. I remember, I think it was like my second, Christmas season. I think it was actually my first time away at Christmas. I had moved to Florida the year before for my my post-secondary education, and the first Christmas I went home, and I believe it was the second Christmas that I hadn't gone home, that a mine in my home county of West Virginia, of Upshur County, West Virginia, the Sago mine collapsed, and 13 people died, I believe it was. It was horrific. I remember watching it on the news, seeing my bus driver, the guy who drove my bus when I was a kid, on the national news, because he was the preacher of a nearby church where family and friends were staged and waiting, and they had been told that everyone had survived, and really it was just like one person survived. And it was awful. I was, down here in Florida, just watching all this happen from 1,000 miles away, tears streaming down my face. It had been the worst mine disaster in quite some time, and then was surpassed not too much longer, like 4 years later, by the Upper Big Branch mine disaster. Nothing changed. Here we are, more than a century later, and West Virginia is still being exploited the same way it was back then. When they lost that battle, they lost much more than they probably could have imagined. Now, of course, West Virginia is not part of the South. I mean, technically, kind of, because we're south of the Mason-Dixon line for the most part, but we're not really like the South. We weren't part of the Confederacy. The states that were part of the Confederacy, though, they had a term called carpetbaggers. Carpetbaggers is a term that came to be used during Reconstruction, which was the period after the Civil War. And they were people who had capital that came into poor, war-stricken communities and just basically bought their way in and took whatever they could because they had more resources. And though that term in its specific original meaning certainly doesn't apply to West Virginia in a literal sense, in a figurative sense, I would say West Virginia has been the victims of carpetbaggers as long as it has existed, before it even existed. And it is a remote area that is difficult to build access roads to and has a lot of natural resources. And so basically, the people that live there extract resources to ship out of state to profit companies that are also out of state. And the few company owners that actually do live in West Virginia, they don't have to worry about all the problems they create with their lax regulations and their horrible anti-tax policies. We are a state that needs support. Like West Virginia is a state that is so economically depressed that there's no way it's not ever going to get out of that economic depression. It's not ever going to happen if there isn't some sort of hand up, because all of our natural resources, all of the resources that we had, were taken for the benefit of other people in other places. Not too long ago, I saw where YouTuber Colin? Why am I calling Colin? Karl Jobst lost his trial with Billy Mitchell. And I was quite dismayed. If you don't know who Karl Jobst is, he's basically an internet journalist. He's a YouTube journalist who does really interesting investigative pieces on questionable things that are going on related to gaming culture. For example, he did a series about charity fraud in a video game thing. He did no, there's more than just that. The retro video game market bubble thing. He did an investigative piece on that and several follow-ups. And those are really valuable to the YouTube community and to the gaming community as a whole. Like, the work that he's doing is important, and a lot of his stuff is more like granular or smaller scale stories, like telling about somebody who cheated at a video game, or somebody who did something really great on a video game, or something like that. But interspaced with those more, sort of entertaining fluff pieces, he does really good work. And the idea that he lost his case really sat with me, and I had to think about why I found it so desperately upsetting. And what I finally came to the realization, after I had actually gone and read at least part of the judgment and read what the judge actually wrote, that I was like, oh, this guy just did not like Karl. For whatever reason, this judge is not on Karl's side. He is definitely going to have to appeal this. And I don't know, it seems like he might have a good shot, because it seems like this guy's got a little bit of a weird idea of what's going on. But the other thing that I concluded was that Karl had made a mistake. And actually, it wasn't that he was denying that he made a mistake. He made a claim based on something that he had reasonable belief was true, that he had from multiple sources, and that made a logical sense based on what he knew at the time. Once he found out the information was incorrect, he removed it from his video. I remember him explicitly saying, hey, you know, I made this mistake, da, da, da. Like, he made explicit retraction of the error that he made in good faith. But technically, by the law, maybe the judge is right. And that's the problem. The man who is suing Karl Jobst is playing on a level that he can't play on. He has apparently access to lawyers in order to sue multiple people and threaten multiple lawsuits. You know, the average person doesn't have the wherewithal to do that. And an internet journalist who is making their living, you know, making mostly, you know, entertaining videos about like gaming achievements or whatever, he doesn't have a whole apparatus behind him. He doesn't have necessarily the wherewithal to have someone go through everything he posts with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that he's not making any legally actionable statements. Like, it's not an even playing field. You know, we have people out here like Karl Jobst, like CoffeeZilla, who is currently being sued by Logan Paul, who never has liked a CoffeeZilla reporting on what he does. And as far as I can tell, there's really not much that Logan Paul has said that CoffeeZilla has been wrong about. He just doesn't like how he's reporting it. I guess. I don't know. That suit seems a little bit more like it might be just a slap suit. Like, there isn't any real merit there. But even if there is merit there, we're talking about somebody who has this huge multi-million-dollar brand, and an internet journalist, a YouTube journalist who specializes in like crypto stuff and like scams, and quite frankly plays a very important role in the community, because one of the things that helps make scams less effective is education. And he's out there saying, these are the different scams that are out there, this is what. And I always really appreciate how that guy goes out of his way to humanize the victims of scams. I think Karl Jobst does the same thing too. Although the scams that he's usually talking about are like cheaters, you know, video game cheaters. But they talk about why it is that what they're calling out is harmful. They show how it's harmful. They don't just tell you about it. And frankly, we need more people like that, you know? Everybody on YouTube, I think, has heard of H-Bomber Guy's seminal video on plagiarism. And quite frankly, we need more videos like that. We need people to believe that there is some potential for consequences for misbehavior as YouTube creators. Like, this format is kind of the Wild West. I think that a lot of what killed Flat Earth were people on YouTube making fun of flat earthers. Like, that might seem frivolous, but it was important. It was an important way of pushing back against a harmful ideology. But these people are playing a game on a level where if somebody decides to come after them, doesn't like their reporting, they don't have the apparatus of a large media organization to protect them, to ensure that they get their rights. You know, another thing that I've noticed a lot is sort of actually a literal carpetbagging situation as well. You know, I live in Florida, and I have a lot of friends and family all throughout the South. And I can tell you, you know, we have rich Northerners moving into our communities all the time. And, you know, just expecting it to be the way they want it to be. They don't have the history. And when I go to my parents' house, the house that my dad lives at, that property is on the farm that my great-grandfather first owned. And he and his father and other family members owned a bunch of other property in the area, and my dad can point them out. This used to be. And people in my community know my family, for good or for ill. You know? They can tell you good things and they can tell you bad things, I'm sure. We have an appreciation for what came before in our community. And somebody who's just coming in and potentially building their own communities, I mean, that's where I live right now. I live in a place called Deltona, which is the biggest city in the county that Daytona Beach is in, which is a pretty big city. So we are just a collection of housing developments stacked up, one next to another. And this area was all swamp, so it's all around all these lakes that they had to build, you know, like artificial lakes to retain the water. And so it is the most confusing place in the world to get around. It's all snaky roads this way and that way, and there's no culture here. You know, that, you know, you might have like people whose kids go to the same school or whatever, but a lot of the people who work in this city have to commute somewhere else to work. And, you know, everybody moved here from all over the place, usually not from Florida. That's sort of the thing most people ask you when you first meet somebody in Florida is where you're from. Because the assumption is most of the time if you're in, you know, the more urban or suburban areas, not the deep rural areas, you're not from Florida. I mean, you know, I actually have friends and family from Florida, and my parents grew up here, but they moved here, you know, as young children, and then moved away, and then I came back. I don't know, we're weird. Can't seem to get away from either one of those places. West Virginia and Florida, it's just in our blood. But it's not just Florida. I mean, Georgia, North Carolina, there are a lot of people moving to those states, and a lot of them are coming from New York, Some of them are coming from California, but it's sort of the similar thing. It's not necessarily Northerners, it's people with resources versus people who have less resources. I mean, even to a certain extent, I could say my brother's doing that right now in Columbus. I mean, he's in this brand new city that didn't used to really exist, and it's being built up all around him. And to him, that's just the way it's always been. But there'll be people who lived there for decades before who would go past that and bemoan what's missing, what was there that is not there anymore. Something he would never have any frame of reference for. I think that in a lot of ways we could even call the current administration sort of a carpetbagger thing, and or even in a lot of ways the modern Republican Party. And starting with George W. Bush, to be clear. I mean, he tried to have that good old boy, country boy thing, that Southern thing. And what they did is they took it and corporatized it. I mean, look at how country music is now like the, pop music, basically, of this day. That's where you go to make money. This soulless corporate music, that's country. Because country music has been taken over. But the funny thing about that, and the funny thing that carpetbaggers never seem to realize, is that they can do what they want, but the people are still going to be here. We're going to figure out some way to survive. After Blair Mountain, West Virginia had to figure out how to survive. You think if we could survive 100 years of that kind of oppression, that, we could give up that easily? I think that artists like Sierra Farrell and Billy Strings, these sort of like new country, bluegrassy types, are showing that though corporate interests may take over mainstream country music and turn it into pop music, but that doesn't mean that they can truly take country music away from the people who really love it and believe in it, and it means something to us. One of the things my mom loves to talk about is how bluegrass, when it first started, was just everybody's music. If you were in a rural area, that's what you listened to. Black, white, Hispanic, didn't matter. There wasn't color lines. There wasn't all of this, like regressive stuff. It was just people who wanted to play music played music. And they made some amazing art that is still, influential to this day. And, people like Billy Strings and Sierra Farrell out there still doing that, following that same tradition. Rihanna Giddens is still out there following that same tradition as a black woman. Like, they can try to get rid of those of us who don't want to go along with their narratives or fit into the carpetbaggers' vision of the world, but we'll still be here. We'll still find a way to function. You had CoffeeZilla selling special edition T-shirts for his legal defense. You had Karl Jobst, having a GoFundMe, and then also, using a lot of his own personal money that he's made with all the videos that he's done about the situation. So, we'll find a way. We have to. The people out here on the edges, on the margins, the ones without the resources, we're always going to find a way to do what we need to do to survive, including making art, including speaking truth to power. And we're not always going to win. And it's going to hurt. I don't know if Karl Jobst's appeal is going to go through. He might ultimately lose his case. But if he does, it's because the law is indifferent to the wider context here. And I don't think that's a great way for law to function. You know, one of the other major employers you'll see in West Virginia, other than oil and gas, is private prisons. The way that we treat people who have been convicted of a crime is so repugnant. I don't know why we are so indifferent. Why we think that just because someone's been convicted of a crime, they deserve any particular punishment that they get. Why do we think it's funny, the idea of people being sexually assaulted in prison? Why do we think it's acceptable that people go to prison and come out as better criminals? Because one of the best ways to survive in a lawless environment is by learning how to work without law. You know, private prisons and prisons in general ensured that slavery has always remained legal in the United States. And that's really infuriating to me. I think we need to revisit the way that we look at how law applies to people with different resource sets. I'm playing the same game as the President of the United States, who has every legal resource he could possibly imagine, basically, at his disposal. If he wanted to come after me for some reason, not that I think I would ever be someone he would even, notice in passing. But if he wanted to, he could. He has all the resources and I have none. And I just don't think, not just the American legal system, but any legal system around the world has grappled with that. Because it's usually the people with the resources who are writing the laws, right? So they set up a fair system where everybody has access to the same legal protections, but they have connections and they have lawyers and they have, people are going to give them the benefit of the doubt just because of who they are, how they look. I don't think that the judge in Karl Jobst's case really gave him the benefit of the doubt. I might be wrong. Again, I've only read part of the actual judgment. I didn't read the whole thing, and I wasn't there for the trial. I don't have any sort of inside knowledge or anything. I've never met the judge, but it just seems to me like that's the way it was. And it was a battle he was maybe never destined to win. All right, family members, I'll talk to you later. Osprey, you want to say hi?
Yes, I do. Look at my belly. Belly, 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 belly.
Oh, you are a good cat. Take care of yourself, family members. We'll talk to you later.